Okay, I'm here with Jeff Measy, and I'm going to speak a little bit about my story. So, from a fitness perspective, I guess I got involved in sport at a reasonably young age. Grew up in Queensland, so my family holidays were spent. I lived in Brisbane, and my family holidays were spent mostly at Stradbroke Island or on the Gold Coast. So a lot of beach activities, a lot of having an active, reasonably healthy lifestyle. My family was quite large, so there were seven kids. I was the youngest of seven, so three boys, three girls, then me, and grew up in a reasonably tough neighbourhood in Brisbane. One parent from a very early age, so sport to me was a really important part of my life. It was a really important thing for me to have an outlet. I learnt a lot throughout my life from sport, from a whole heap of different people. So starting off, I guess the first sport that I got involved with, and the first kind of organised activity, was rugby league. I played rugby league from about grade 3 or 4 or something. I was like 8 or 9 years old in Brisbane, and just got into that through school first, and then I started playing club football as well. And it was an interesting thing that, coming from the background that I was in, the coaches that I had really became influential in my life. And it was one of the first kind of, I guess, keys to me, and the first sort of aha moments at a very young age around coaching and the influence you can have on people and all of those sorts of things. And that really carried with me through my whole life, and became more evident as I got older. But the coaches that I had were really important role models for me. That was the probably most significant thing from the kind of early age, from probably around 9 or 10 until I was 15, 16, around that age. They were really important male role models for me. And I watched what they did, good, bad, indifferent. Some of them were just amazing as far as their ability to empathise with the group of boys they were training, to get the best out of you. So their encouragement, their understanding of using sport as a tool to help people improve themselves in all areas of their life. And that was something for me that became really important early on. So playing rugby league through was probably my main sport. At around 10 or 11 years old, I started surfing. And again, one of the things that I really kind of like to think about is this idea of the kind of, if you do a Venn diagram, the two circles and that intersecting point, the opportunity and influence. And so around sport, that's often been a factor for me, and also in other parts of my life as far as a decision-making process. So we think about opportunity and influence as two areas. The intersecting point is where you have the chance to take action. Those two things align, and it gives you the opportunity to do something about it. So when I was around 9 or 10, I remember at the time it was my brother's girlfriend's brother. They weren't married at that time, so he was a family friend who was a surfer, and he bought me a surfboard. And coming from where I was, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford that. So someone doing that for me was, again, one of those chances that influence. He was prepared to help me out, learn how to do that. And so it was kind of the second sport that I got involved with. And I played rugby league and surfed all the way up until I was around 20. And they were really important sports. And then as I kind of went through, I started to pick up a few other things. So left school reasonably early. Again, this idea of the things that impact your life and factors that happen. I had a guidance counsellor who told me at a young age that I wasn't smart enough to go to university. And I was just an average sort of student as far as my effort. I certainly was more interested in surfing and rugby league than I was academically, for a whole heap of reasons. And so when they told me that, I left school not long after and ended up just going into the building industry and started, I was a brickies labourer first, and then built pools and landscaping, and went into that area in my life. And so while doing this, kind of my next sport, so I'd been playing rugby league and surfing for quite a while. And then I started doing martial arts. I started doing karate. And for me, it was one of those things that the discipline of the sport was really important. I loved the fact that you had to develop and learn. And then quite early on, when I started doing the sport, I had the opportunity to teach. And one of the real important and amazing things for me was once you started to teach someone else how to do something, you had to really understand it well yourself. And I really enjoyed that. I thought that that was a great part of doing that. And obviously that kind of inner coach teacher that was always sort of inside me was able to flourish doing that. I had an instructor at the time who was a great instructor, really good guy, close to my age. So we were really friendly, both from the sport perspective, but also on a personal level. We became friends, and he started doing triathlon not that long after I started with him, probably a year or so, and I'd never heard of this sport. And he kind of told me about it. It's swim, cycle, run. And me being a power athlete, it's probably, that's kind of endurance sport doesn't particularly suit my body type or the way that I'm built. But I thought, oh yeah, I'll have a go at this. It sounded really interesting. And so I started doing triathlons. And not long after, I moved from living in Brisbane to the Gold Coast. So I moved down there to live on the coast, which was something that I'd always wanted to do. Like, I love the Gold Coast, enjoyed going down there when I was living in Brisbane. From the time I was 15, kind of went down there almost every weekend and surfed and just hung out with mates. So moving to the coast and took up triathlon and got involved with that sport. I'm not an elite athlete by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just an average hack, but I have a go, have a crack at anything, and really enjoyed doing it. And then I ended up meeting someone and moved from the Gold Coast to Melbourne and continued doing triathlon. And, one of those sports that just gives you the opportunity to meet a whole different range of people and different people from different areas of life, but also different types of athletes. And it was really interesting doing triathlon, watching the different body shapes and the performance of people who sometimes you would look at and think that they didn't look that like they were that fit or, even sometimes that healthy, and then they'd run past you like, you weren't moving. So it's an interesting kind of observation around, performance and the way people look, and kind of this idea of this internal your VO2 max, which is your aerobic capacity, which everyone has almost to a predetermined level. You have the genetics and you can maximize your VO2 max, but, there's going to be a limit depending on, your genetics. So just seeing people who were all different body shapes and types and the different performances they could get was always something that I found really interesting. Jeff, do you want to just shoot me a message? Because I don't know where we're at as far as I can't hear you. And I'm not sure how far we want to keep going. Okay, just keep going. All right, mate, I will. Okay, thanks. So moving to Melbourne was certainly a different change in my life. As I said, the way that I'd been brought up and the sort of situation that I was in had at times been quite challenging. So my resilience was quite strong. Like, I had to become a resilient person. I had to be quite self-sufficient. And living in Melbourne, I ended up running my own landscaping business for 4 years while I was here. Got married in Melbourne, and then my wife and I decided that we were going to go overseas. So we actually went to stay in Albury it was going to be a short-term stay up there with her parents while we just saved a bit of money to go and live overseas for a couple of years. We were going to go to London. And while I was there, I had the opportunity again. So this kind of idea of, influence opportunity, people who kind of, her family and her, influencing me to kind of think differently than just being a landscaper or just working in one area. And, knowing that my passion was in sport, we had the opportunity to do what was then a fitness leaders course, which was run out of New South Wales, the equivalent of just the Cert 3 or Cert 4 in fitness nowadays. So we went and did that, and some of the people that I that lectured on that course, again, were really significant in kind of shaping the way that I thought about fitness, the way I thought about. Certainly, one of the things that I noticed with them was their ability to present. It was just, there are a couple of people that were just amazing presenters, and one of them is a guy named Matt Church, who's become a really big name keynote speaker. So this was in his kind of probably early 20s when he was doing this, and he was in the fitness industry, working as an instructor in the industry, but also presenting at courses, and just had a natural ability to do it. And someone that I just looked at and thought, wow, this guy's just amazing. If I could ever present like that, that would be fantastic. And so we ended up doing that course. And as a result of that, I was working in a gym in Albury. And the people who owned the gym ended up being friends of ours and asked me if I wanted to manage it, which was great because having that kind of passion all my life for sport and for the fitness industry, to have that opportunity to go and manage a gym was just fantastic. And so I'd been managing this facility for around probably 2 months, and had one morning I kind of thought, I'm going to do it was getting close to triathlon season again, and I thought, I'll jump on the bike and do a time trial. There was kind of this circuit that when I'd been driving, I kind of worked out the distances, and it was 20 k's out, 20 k's back. It was actually on the Hume Highway out of Albury, so between Albury and Wodonga, went off onto the Hume Highway. And so I jumped on my bike down at the gym, took off, went out over the overpass, got 20 k's in, coming back into Albury, and it was sunny morning. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning, clear, and a semi-trailer ran into the back of me. So I was probably doing 30, 35 k's an hour, and he was doing 110. Just clipped me and knocked me off to the side. My bike went underneath the semi-trailer. And I remember seeing it afterwards. I mean, you can imagine what would happen. You could see actually see tyre marks across the frame where it had gone across it. It was back in the days of the old steel frames. You didn't have carbon fibre. I mean, some people had aluminium then, but most people had just a steel frame. And it just pressed the steel flat where the truck had run over the top of it. So needless to say, fairly traumatic, and the impact was fairly significant. And so I was rushed straight to hospital from there. Went into the Wodonga hospital, which was only, say, 10 k's away, and had to have emergency surgery straight away. They thought I had a severed artery to my kidney. So they opened me up, checked that out, found out that wasn't the case. But what had happened was I had a spinal cord injury. So I had a T12L1 compression of my spinal cord, which meant that I'd end up in a wheelchair. At that point in time, that was, while it's a significant thing, was the least of my worries. I had so many broken bones, fractured pelvis in 7 places. There was some internal bleeding. There was just a range of injuries that had happened as a result of the impact. And I spent 2 days. I'd been moved from the Wodonga hospital to Albury so they could stabilise me. It was a bigger hospital, and spent 2 days there, and then they flew me to Melbourne. And when I got to Melbourne, that was certainly not the end of any challenges. I then spent another 3.5 weeks in intensive care in Melbourne. Had a whole range of issues at that time, and it was really difficult. My family at the time, so my wife and her family, were a massive support to me, and I don't remember anything. I was basically in an induced coma for the whole time. And so they were a really important part of, living through that. And then for me later on, that became a real source of motivation to get myself back on track. After the 4 weeks in intensive care and things had settled down, I only remember the last couple of days. And then I got moved into an acute ward, which I was in for another 8 weeks. And for that period of time, because of the fractured pelvis, I had an external frame that was pulled my pelvis back into shape. I wasn't allowed to move. I had to lie flat on my back for 8 weeks looking at the ceiling. This was pre-Netflix, pre-Foxtel. So it was, daytime television, days of your lives, or it was looking at the ceiling or reading or doing whatever you could. So a lot of time for reflection, thinking about things. And it was probably one of probably one of the first times I really thought about, a lot of the influences in my life. I never really lacked motivation. There was always reason, plenty of motivation in my life, and just self-driven to do things. I would just go and do stuff. I can remember when I started doing martial arts. I talked to a lot of my mates about it. We're all around the same age, 17. And, 3 or 4 of them are like, yeah, let's go along. And like a couple of years later, I've got a black belt in karate and they haven't started. And, not to say anything bad about them, but that I would just go and do stuff. I'd just go and join in and do it. And it's just an internal drive that I always had. And it was always around sport and activity. I can remember when I was living on the coast or, going on holidays, I'm not one to laze around on the beach or just splash around in the water. Like, I'm either surfing, I'm out surf swimming, I'm doing something, I'll jump in a kayak. There's always an activity involved. There's always got to be something happening. So, that's kind of just the way that I am. So after I'd been 8 weeks in the acute ward, which was kind of the next level, I was going into rehab, and it was really interesting. It was probably, you think about a bone break, and bone breaks are 6 weeks to heal. So I'd had 4 weeks in intensive care, and then after 2 to 3 weeks in the acute ward, it was kind of like, the thing that was holding me back was the fractured pelvis from being able to sit up and then actually get into a wheelchair and actually start moving around and doing stuff. So getting rehabilitated. So it was around 4 weeks when almost, it was like, oh, you'll be out soon. You'll be out soon. You'll be out soon. So if anyone who's in lockdown at the moment, you can understand exactly what I'm saying. Like this, you're not knowing what's going to happen. It builds resilience within you. And, other things at that time. So it was around the end of the year, so coming into summer in Victoria. And I can remember the nurses, scurrying around sort of mid-November, early December, getting kind of spare beds organised. And they were saying they know that every year there's a certain number of people that end up having diving accidents and end up being quadriplegics, and they had to make beds for them. And I saw this happen. I had a guy sitting across from me in a bed who had fallen off a ladder from 9 feet painting a ceiling and broken his neck and was going to be a quadriplegic for the rest of his life, which meant he didn't have anywhere near as much function as I had, and I'd been hit by a semi-trailer at 110 k's an hour. So you're kind of making these observations and getting, a fair bit of relativity about life and, what's possible and what could have been for me, but certainly what was. And those sorts of things really just made me think, well, I've got to make the most of this. It could have been far worse. It's not fun. Like, it's not great, right? But it could have been much, much worse. So that was kind of another thing just in my personality and in the people around me, the network that I had, that was really important. So finally, after 12 weeks, I was able to jump into a chair and go into what was then the rehab ward, which those days in the hospital that it was in Melbourne, they've actually knocked down it now and and people rehabbing it a completely different hospital now. But it was pretty rudimentary, and it wasn't great. I can remember the physio that I had. I'd do physio 3 or 4 times a week, and that kind of, you'd be in the chair and you'd have to learn how to get up a step or do different things. She'd kind of put together this challenge for me for the 2 hours of physio, and I'd do it within 15, 20 minutes, and then we'd just jump in chairs and race around the hospital, which was up and down hills, and just getting stronger. They had like a rehab gym there that no one had used the equipment for who knows how long. And I was straight in there jumping on the equipment, doing weights, doing dips on the parallel bars that people learn to walk again on, just that kind of approach to everything, thinking I can't be here any longer than I need to be. And another observation that I made of someone at the time, it was early on when I went into the rehab area, and there were a couple of guys who kind of came into the kitchen, into the area where you have lunch, and I was just sitting there by myself. And they came and sat next to me, and they just spent the whole time complaining about the place, how bad it was. And I just thought to myself, wow, I can't let myself be influenced by that at this point in time. I don't have anything that I can necessarily help them with at this point in time, because I'm dealing with my own stuff, right? So I just kind of said to myself, right, for the rest of the time I'm here, I'm not going to hang out with those guys. I'm not going to, because it's identifying those influences that are not going to be helpful to you. And certainly for me, that was one of the things that I did. And so, kind of kept to myself, did my own thing, just drove myself and had my family support, which was really important. After being in hospital in the rehab ward for 6 months, which made a total of, for 3 months, which made a total of 6 months total in hospital, I finally was able to get out and went back to Albury and started coaching triathletes. And so, again, this, not a great time, mentally you kind of think you're okay, but looking back now, I wasn't anywhere near as good as I thought I was. I thought, hey, I'm dealing with this all right, but there were things that I look back on and think, oh yeah, I'm struggling a bit at different times, which is understandable, right? And so, the idea of building this resilience as a young person through the challenges that I had growing up, the sport that I was involved with, the coaches that I had, all this stuff just builds to make you the person that you are. So when I had this challenge, which was a significant thing, I had tools to call upon and I had some understanding of different things. And I guess going back to Albury, the thing that I thought, well, I want to start coaching. I've got the opportunity to do something different. I can't go back in the landscape. So I went down the coaching field and started coaching triathletes when I first went back there, because that was the sport that I was doing, something I was interested in. When I first went back, I set up a triathlon club in Albury, which when we first started it, there'd been one, I think 4 or 5 years earlier, had run for a couple of years, but just didn't get any traction and kind of faded away. So we established a completely new club. I worked with a mate of mine who ended up owning a bike shop there. He was a cyclist, a couple of other people that I knew. There was a guy there who was a really great triathlete, and so was his son. And we started building this network. So through, I had a personal training business then. So this is in 1992-3, and started building this triathlon club, which now it's still running in Albury now. It's got 450 odd members. And, it's one of those things that I'll look back and think, that's a great thing to have been involved with. It's a great thing to have had some influence on setting that up and, and seeing where it's kind of gone now and the opportunity it's given people. Given the nature of country towns, you get to do a whole range of stuff that, the city doesn't offer. So I was writing some pieces for the paper on different sports. I was getting interviewed on the television pretty regularly I ran multi-sport events up there, so triathlon, aquathons and duathlon, so swim, cycle, run events, bike run events and swim run events during, weeknights and throughout summer, and then on weekends running some triathlons, which was just, again, great opportunity to do those things, which you probably wouldn't get in the city. And some of the athletes up there were just incredible. I ended up coaching around 20 triathletes, male and female, all age groups, and all abilities from, just your average person right through to, I had people who raced at world championships and really great athletes to work with, and enjoyed that. We were training at a local swimming pool, and the guy who ran the pool, which was just a leisure centre with a gym and pool in it in Wodonga, was the coach of the local football club. So he came down and said, oh, would you like to do the fitness for my football team, Australian Rules Football, which I'd watched probably, 2 or 3 games ever in my life. I really didn't understand it, didn't know it. But what I did know is the principles of movement I understood, because I'd kind of educated myself after my fitness leaders course. I really got into reading about strength and conditioning and movement patterns and understanding aerobic fitness and performance for athletes. I had, very first polar heart rate monitors, which you could download onto your computer. I can remember back in the day, it was quite a big heart rate monitor, and you used to actually lift it off and put it onto this little pad, and that would then download into your computer on the old Apple Mac, and then it would load up with a graph with people's heart rates. And it was all very high tech back in those days. We didn't have like things that you could just stick on your watch, which would tell you your heart rate and your blood lactate and all the other things. It was the very early days of of those sort of devices, of wearables. And things have changed significantly now, which is amazing. So started working with this footy club and kind of thought, well, I understand the movement patterns, and I don't kind of know the game setup. I didn't know positions, didn't know structures, but I could see what they needed. And it was one of the things that really drew me to Australian rules football as a sport, and especially from a conditioning perspective. The fact that the athletes had to be, they had to run great distances, they had to be strong, they had to be brave, they had to have, an understanding of the game and movement patterns. There were just so many things about it that I thought, this is a really great sport. Like, I really enjoy the physical side of it and the attributes that these athletes have to be able to compete in it. So I worked with the footy club up there for 4 years, and 2 of those I was with the representative team, which was the Ovens and Murray Football League. It was the number 1 country football league at that stage. We won 2 country championships, and each club probably had 2 or 3 ex-AFL players playing for them. So it kind of was a first introduction to even higher levels. And for me, I'd always been interested in reasonably good athletes and kind of performance and understanding what they did and how they did things. And through this kind of relationship, I ended up going down to Geelong Football Club and met a guy by the name of Phil Walsh, who if people know Australian rules football, he passed away a number of years ago. He was coaching Adelaide Football Club. And he was, at the time, the strength and conditioning coach down at Geelong. And it was in the days of the Gary Abletts and Billy Brownless and these guys all playing down there. And I went down quite a few times and kind of watched what Phil did and thought, I kind of get what you do. And if I was working with athletes at this level, I'd be doing similar things. It seemed very logical to me, and it seemed like the right sort of thing to do. And I was able to bring some of those things back to that level that I was at, but also gave me an interest. And Phil said to me, look, if you want to get involved in footy, you really need to have a degree. You need to, you'd need to go to uni and get a degree. And it was one of those things of opportunity and influence. Louise and I were kind of ready to move back to Melbourne, and the influence of Phil talking about doing a degree and saying, you're not too old. You can, at the stage I was 30, I think. And I knew that I was smart enough to be able to do it. The days of the guidance counsellor who told me I wasn't smart enough to do it were long past. So we decided to move back. And just before I moved back, I saw an ad for the VFL, and Port Melbourne, a team that plays in the VFL, which is second level under the AFL in Victoria. They were looking for a twos coach for their reserve side. And I knew that I'd been doing fitness coaching, but I hadn't done any sort of football coaching. So I thought, I'll just write a letter to them and just tell them that I'm moving down and this is what I do. And so I sent them a note just saying, look, I'm moving back to Melbourne. I'm going to be doing an undergraduate in exercise science, and I'd be interested in coming down and helping out, or seeing how it works. And so they got me in for an interview and ended up appointing me to be fitness coach. So my first year of uni, which was 97, I was 31, and I ended up being a fitness coach at the Port Melbourne Footy Club in the VFL. So, again, that kind of influence opportunity, it was a great chance for me to work at a reasonably good level of football, start to understand that. The guy who was coaching at the time, a wonderful guy named Neil Ross, I became quite good friends with, and he knew someone else who was working in the development competition for the AFL, so what was then the TAC Cup, and introduced me to this person. And so after 1 year at Port Melbourne, I actually moved to the Sandringham Dragons, which were then Paran Dragons, in the TAC Cup, which was all of the best kids from around different regions came together and they'd play in a team in a competition, which was, at that stage, we actually played in Tassie and against the ACT Rams as well, but predominantly Victorian country and Victorian metro teams, and the best of the best kids around. And so I worked with that footy club for 3 years. The first year we won a premiership there, and we had 7 boys drafted into the AFL, which was just amazing to see them go through the process and develop and become AFL players. And it's interesting because growing up, didn't follow the AFL. I never had a team that I supported. And people, being a Melbourneite now for 20 years, people say, "Oh, who do you follow?" And I don't follow any team because I never had a team to start with. And I knew lots of guys who played AFL footy, so I just kind of like watching the game. So I'm in the fortunate position where I don't have to bear the losses certainly from at that level anyway. And so after 3 years of working at that football club, during the time there was a guy by the name of Chris Judd came through our program, who people who know AFL footy would know. Chris was an amazing young man and like an amazing athlete, and came through and ended up, going on and doing really great things. Luke Ball was another one who came through that program. And you see now, I mean, they talk a lot about now. I think the two boys that were playing last night, one was Gold Coast and one was playing for St Kilda. They both came through the Dragons program, and it's a great under-18 development program. And it was a great chance for me, again, to work with really high-level athletes. It was while I was doing my second, third, and then the year after I'd finished my undergraduate degree. So the ability to take kind of the knowledge that I was learning. So I understood certainly some of the theory, and I understood the practice of coaching and strength and conditioning, because I'd done it for so long with the triathletes and other footy players. But then going to university and knowledge that sat behind it was really beneficial for me. It was great to have that. So 3 years there, and then kind of moved away, and I started working in sports management. So I got a job at Monash University, started running fitness facilities, and around when I'd left hospital, so that was in 1991. So this is going on kind of 10 years later. There are a lot of people who said, "Oh, you're not going to be able to do this, and you're not going to be able to do that. And it's going to be difficult, and all this sort of thing." And being the person that I am, and then my nature, I was just like, well, I'll do whatever I can do, and I'll make the most of what I can do, and I will try and excel at the things I do. And been fortunate enough to be able to do that. I mean, my undergraduate went really well in, and got some opportunities as a result of that through my association at the Sandringham Dragons Footy Club. The guy who was the regional manager there introduced me to someone at Monash University and got a job there. Went into a management program when I was at Monash University and did a master's in management within the organisation that I was in, and I worked there for 6 years and got skilled beyond the fitness area into business management as well, which was really great for me to be able to apply the business knowledge with the sports knowledge, and probably at a time when you could see in sport there was a lot of sort of things being passed back and forward, that sports were starting to talk about having KPIs and about processes, and sort of using some business lingo in sport, and vice versa. You saw the same thing happening the other way. So to kind of go through that was really great, and learning all those sorts of things. So I worked at Monash for 6 years, and during that time I started coaching at University Blacks Football Club, which is in the amateurs. So again, through an association, and kind of, even though I was working predominantly in business as my full-time role, I still had a hand in with doing conditioning work. And then I started coaching. And so, talking back to the influences that the coaches had on me when I was a young man, I knew that I had the ability to influence other people when I was coaching, and when I was, whether I was a strength and conditioning coach or when I actually started coaching footballers properly, I knew that the things I said carried weight. I knew that the things that I could help them develop as people, and there were a whole range of things that I was able to do, and a lot of that was because they were the influences I had, and I felt like it was almost incumbent upon me to go and do that, because people had influenced me and basically shaped the person that I was and the way that I thought and the type of person that I wanted to be. And I thought, wow, if I can do at least a small part of that. And I certainly, there's been a lot of times with people that I've coached, they've come back to me years after I've spoken to them about something. And sometimes it's a heated moment. Like there was a guy we were playing once, and we had an older player who'd been he'd played AFL footy, had come back and was playing with us. And the reason that he was playing with us is because he was going to be certainly beneficial for our team from a skills perspective, but the leadership and the growth that he could help with the young guys that played with us was going to be really significant. And I remember we were playing one day and he wasn't going so well, and he came off the ground, threw his mouth guard down and was grumpy about something. I said, "Listen, Luke," I said, "it's not about you. I said, you're here to help develop these young men and to help make them better leaders, and to do that, you need to really show a certain type of behaviour when you're doing this sort of thing." And he came back to me years later and said, Pato, when you said that to me, it really changed the way I was thinking about it and shifted, my kind of mindset around what I was trying to do. And I knew that, as a coach, you have the opportunity to do that. So, it's one of the things that I really love about coaching. Really enjoy doing that sort of thing. And so kind of, I went away from the triathlon as far as coaching and got more involved in football, certainly through my undergraduate and then later on. And again, the stars aligned 5 or 6 years ago. As far as this kind of idea of, opportunity and influence, I'd been talking to someone for a long time about doing an Ironman triathlon as a wheelchair athlete, and a guy who was one of the first people to ever do Hawaii. John McLean is his name. He's an amazing guy. And was just chatting to him at an event once, and he's like, "Oh, well, if you ever want to do it, you should do Bustleton. Like, it's a great race to start with, flat, good conditions, over in Western Australia." So I sort of was at a point where, my work was in such a way that I sort of was looking to do something different. And so I went off and I actually bought a gym with a mate of mine who was a physio. And at that time, kind of working in the gym mornings and night, freed up some space in the middle of the day. And I think, you know what? I'm going to have a go at this. I'm going to actually try and do an Ironman triathlon. So I set myself a year to prepare, get myself ready. It was actually, I think it was 57 weeks, I think, from the time that I kind of started thinking about it and started training until the event. So I actually was, it was 4 or 5 weeks before the event, and then I went through a whole year preparing myself. Went over to Bustleton thinking, I was feeling pretty good. Got through the swim. So the Ironman triathlon is a 3.8 kilometre swim, 180 kilometre bike ride, and then a full marathon, so 42.2. For me, swimming just with a wetsuit on, so you get a bit of buoyancy in your legs. The bike is a hand cycle. So it's a double arm crank. You're back in a recumbent position. And the race chair is the ones that you see the Kurt Fearnleys of the world racing and doing marathons or doing track work. And so got through the swim, feeling pretty good. It was like an hour and 25 minutes or something, which was kind of middle of the pack. I sort of felt like I was going all right. Jumped on the bike, and it was 3 60-kilometre loops, and got through the first loop, was feeling pretty good, back out. 3/4 of the way through the second loop, my shoulder started hurting a bit. I was sort of like, oh, yeah. So I got to 120k mark, heading back out in the last loop. And by the time I got to 140 kilometres, I actually couldn't lift my arm anymore, my left arm. So I'd actually impinged one of the tendons in my muscle, and it had inflamed, and I couldn't lift my arm up. And not having that injury before and not knowing, I was kind of like, well, the arm's pretty important for me. If I haven't got them, it's very difficult to get around and move. So I ended up having to pull out after this kind of big build up and setting myself and, thinking, oh, well, here goes, we're going to have a crack at it. Ended up pulling out 140 Ks into the bike ride. And then took probably 6 months after that, I'd entered Cairns Ironman. And it's a tougher course. It's a really hilly bike ride. Conditions can be, anything up there in Cairns in the middle of July. And this day that we went, it actually rained for like 15 hours straight. And anyone who's been to Queensland up in that way, the torrential rain's pretty hectic. So got through the swim again, same sort of time, feeling pretty good. On the bike, I was just cranking along, feeling like I was going all right. The bike took me 8.5 hours, and there are cut-offs on the course. So fortunately, I got in. I think I was like 45 minutes before the cut-off to finish the bike, and then jumped in the race chair. And the race chair for me is, once I get to that stage, I know that I'm going to finish, because you've got another 7 hours to finish the race chair, and it took me 3, just over. So finished my first Ironman in Cairns, which was 13.5 hours. Amazing experience. I had my family up there, my young son. It was really great to have done. And I know that Jeff was at the footy club at that stage when I was working at Ajax Footy Club. And, I can remember talking to the boys. I said, oh, yeah, it's like playing 7 games of footy back to back, that's all. So it was always a good tool to be able to use if they started complaining about the training being too hard or anything. And so I ended up doing Cairns a couple of times, and I qualified for Hawaii Ironman twice. And I've actually been there twice and haven't finished. So it's one of those things that's still that little bug in the back of my head. The first time I went over, it was really hot and I crashed my bike and didn't finish the bike leg. And the second time I just missed the cutoff on the bike. And the cutoff for the hand cycle athletes is the same as it is for anybody else, for the able-bodied people. So if you're not quick enough to get through the course, then you just get dragged off. So it's one of those things that I kind of think, oh, I've got to get back there and have another crack at. Jeff, do you want to just shoot me another message about kind of where we want to go to now? Hope you're still there, mate, listening. And I know we've got a little chat box here, so if anyone has any questions while I'm rambling on, feel free to jump on and put something in the chat, and I can answer any questions. Nothing's out of bounds as far as I'm concerned. One of the things that we're talking about with Onekeelo coaches is this idea of trying to marry up trainers with coaches and how you do that. So I wrote up a little thing that I thought could be interesting for people. It's kind of like a shopping list. So if you're thinking about, what do you want in a trainer? What are some of the things that are really important to you that might help you to start to kind of narrow down and work out, who you might want to work with. So, things around gender, whether you want a male, female, or you don't mind, age, the qualification someone has. So does it matter to you, whether someone has undergraduate degree or they've got a fitness leaders, like a Cert 3, Cert 4, and a PhD. The experience levels of people, different, it's just freezing up a little bit. Experience levels might be important to different people. Are you looking for someone who's got personal performance themselves or achievement? They've done things in their own sport, or they're a CrossFitter who's really good at it, or they're a bodybuilder. Thinking about those kinds of things. I think the kind of couple of key things for me: personality type and values. You want to make sure that you're working with someone who's got a similar kind of mindset that you have, and similar sort of values might be quite helpful for you when you're thinking about those sorts of things. So the final kind of, I'll just finish off with just probably 5 things that Jeff asked about, some specific things for me. So what's my area of speciality? What's the stuff that I think that I can really deliver? So I was really good at anatomy and physiology. So from an anatomical perspective, I'm really good at biomechanical analysis. I actually wrote a 14,000 word paper on kicking a football. So I can analyse people's movement quite well and understand, if people are favouring one side or the other, or injuries and that type of thing. And from my triathlon and football coaching, the aerobic endurance side of things, and certainly from personally doing that. He asked me what my client's least favourite exercise might be, and it's the kettlebell exercise called a Turkish get-up. So if you want to try something that's quite tough, grab yourself a kettlebell and try a few of those. One of the things that people, really don't like. What are the kinds of things that people need to focus on from a motivational perspective? So for me, the really important thing is around internal dialogue. What are you saying to yourself? What words are you talking to yourself about? What are you saying all the time? And be honest with yourself about why you're training, why you're not training, these types of things. So that internal dialogue is a really important thing. A question around the myth. So what's the greatest myth for me in sport or in coaching? And it's that protein puts on muscle. Your body only needs like 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight a day, depending on, the level of athlete and what you're doing. So, these protein powders and stuff, they're great for certain things, but you don't need to overload on protein. That's one of the things that just is a bugbear for me, and especially for young men, thinking that, if I just have protein powder, I'm gonna put on muscle. You've got to do the work, right? Like with anything. The one exercise that I would say for people to do, if they could only do one exercise for the rest of their life, is burpees, because you don't need any equipment. They're physically hard, mentally tough, and it's multi-joint exercise, and they're big muscle groups, and they're bloody hard. So burpees would be the one. And the most effective thing for me, So if I could give you one piece of advice with your training, what would it be? It's be consistent. I've seen people who are average punters, like just average people, get amazing results from consistency. So just understanding what you're trying to achieve and just getting out there day in, day out. 90% of the time, do 90% of the work, and you'll go well. Thanks for listening.